continue. Thank you.
Can you give the ball to Priscilla Mercer?
Yes, I hope you can.
Well, I am.
We got to see the green ball next to your name, Lily.
Let's see.
Okay, Lily, use the green ball. Thank you.
Can you one slide, Lily, so we can have the picture of Sherry?
Sure.
Let's remember.
So I have yep,
there you go. Oh, there you see Sherry, and I've kind of highlighted her background, and she is really excellent, and we're excited to have her. And then next slide, please, Lily.
Yep, me.
So, as I said, Lily has her doctorate from University of Connecticut. She is in charge of the LSU geology program, which I think is very important. And she worked as a long-term care ombudsman in her previous life, and is again was involved with 34 Louisiana facilities. The thing she's doing is she's the prouder of a Don, and we're having a contest to win a vehicle that she is sitting on there. It looks to me like she's taking a tour of the zoo, but you never know when with a mother of a little boy who's a year and a half.
Exactly 2.
2. So I'll hand it over to you, Lily, and we'll go from there.
Okay, for fun, I put my picture up. Can anybody see it? Can you see it, Bob or Merce?
Yes.
Are we you?
All right, because just for a minute, I wanted to say Happy Mardi Gras, because Mardi Gras season in full swing here in Louisiana, so you all know what that means. But I wanted to start off just by telling you all how just great I am to work with Sherry, Merce, Bob, and everybody that's on the phone, because if we're busy your work is, we realize you're dealing with conflicts, with dilemmas, with challenges every single day. So there are currently 74 participants on nationwide, so that's a very exciting thing. I won't stay on the camera, but I want to just tell you I'll take the first about 20 minutes to go through some background and also to get us warmed up to talk about our cases with Vic and me. If I'm not speaking now, you might want to mute your microphone because I'm hearing a little bit of active people with their own paperwork. So just what made me think about this time, if you thought Ben Franklin 235 or 25 years ago, there's only 2 things that we can count on, and the answer, right, is in taxes. So we're approaching tax season, or in it, and I'll deal with with the nursing home setting. We know that there's 1,650,000 nursing home residents nationwide. We know that the majority die in institutions. Most of us die in either a nursing home or a hospital, about 50% in hospitals, about 20% of all people in long-term care facilities. You're still not always comfortable thinking about death and dying. So what can we do today to think about some very basic concepts, but concepts that will help us to flesh out our own practice and just to deliberate and to connect. One of the areas of focus for these presentations is clarity and connection. So trying to reach out to people, all of you who do this essential work in long-term care facilities. So I want to talk about some ethical issues, comfortable issues in general, looking at some very basic theory and reason why. But if I find some relevant literature, some of what I've found and Sherry and I have picked are some resources that we hope will be helpful for you. So even if things feel they're not moving as quickly, look at your slides, the handout that we sent to you, and know that there's a basic resource in Sherry's work and Beecham's work and Chris work, Mercedes Berg-Cliff done a ton of work. So there's a lot of people writing in this area and a nationwide group. Elaine Congress is a professor and associate dean at Fordham, and she's written a wealth of information on ethics, as has Frederick Reamer and many other people. We use Elaine's ethic model. We'll just talk about different interventions. So for the few minutes that I have, I want to think about values, like what values, what brings you to social work, what you find important, and that the crux of our social work practice rests on our fundamental values. And if I ask you right now, do you know what they are? The majority of people would be able to pull them up, and I just talk like the teacher that I am. But we have to think about these core principles. We're talking about social work, right? So that our core ethical principles, each one is based on values. Service, right? Social justice, dignity of each person, importance of human relationships, integrity, and confidence. So there are 6. And when you ask social workers, what's our premier values, they'll say domination. And domination really blooms from, and it comes from this side of dignity and worth of each person. So it's kind of this broad ethical principle. But this involves me for a moment because I want to just update you on a couple of the new sources in the country, and also to highlight why I think this is really the essential one for this discussion. So we know that we treat a person in a caring, respectful fashion. We're mindful of individual differences with a cultural and ethnic diversity. We're socially responsible in promoting self-determination. We seek to enhance clients' capacity and opportunity to change and address their own needs. So that's the sense of self-determination. Big issue for us as social workers is we have not only dual responsibilities, but responsibilities to, first, we know the code, and most of you know it pretty well. We know in small divisions, we go from client to colleague. We have responsibilities to our client, responsibilities to our colleagues, responsibilities to our practice settings, responsibilities as professionals, to the profession, and to the broader society. But think about how these conflicts between clients' interests, anxieties, and our agencies, our nursing homes, the administration, nurses, the plan coordinator, and especially the families, right? So that values, our values, can kind of come in a strong or different than families, friends, other people in the facility. So with values, can't be right or wrong. They're face-to-face, and it's just an is for us. Uncomfortable versus unethical, and we deal with both, and teach my students, especially in a deep south area that has a very strong foothold in the religious perspective of looking at how do we make decisions. So students often struggle. Might be uncomfortable dealing with they may be uncomfortable dealing with end-of-life decision capacity, uncomfortable with uncomfortable with self-determination. But it's so unethical, as we know, when there are two competing interests, and one is more based in the rights of the person, of our social obligation of our profession. So autonomous or well-being, love of our students, of our clients, of our residents in social work, social work related areas. And I know I'm kind of speaking quickly. I want to get through some basics, but I view a little bit of the theoretical principles of deontology and teleology. And the reason why is that these are the areas that we practice under if we don't know. So many have probably taken classes in bioethics or end-of-life classes, in death and dying. You often start with the principles in terms of how decisions about life. So as neonatologists, as we know, are very duty-driven. So what it means, they can be absolute in the way that they look at what to do. So people, and I ask my students, is it to lie? So the truth, if people say you have to tell the truth no matter the consequences, you're saying that truth is overriding principle, even if it creates chaos, confusion, disappointment. So very important for us as social workers, because we may be dealing with a family or a resident who believes in promoting life at any outcome. So I've asked just recently my students, is it ever right to lie? And a student said, it's all wrong to lie. And let's think about that as social workers, right? Will you redirect your with Alzheimer's who wants to go to work? Would you tell him or her that you don't need to worry about work today? Would you ever tell somebody that everything will be okay, even if it's not? We as social workers know that that's probably not always a good thing to say, because we have no idea how we lie all the time. And the reason you brought up is because the way to look at death and dying is essential in terms of how view interventions with advanced directives. I think that it's always harmful to raw feeding or nutrition. They might believe that they have into their family member or themselves. If people think that we have to promote life at any level, they might believe everyone should be a CP to talk about a full cook later. So utilitarians, we think of utilitarianism or teleologists in terms of do the means justify the ends, right? So and there are some examples here, the good for the greatest number of people. We have to think about, how do you decide when to intervene? How do you decide if the outcome is worth? So we have, sometimes people might be recommending that we use ethics committees. So usually an ethics committee is going to take a teleological view of the effort. So what's going to happen if we stop the event, or we withdraw or treatment or antibiotics? It's very important to think that most of us, and third really is the second, most of us do use a utilitarian or teleological perspective. We weigh out what we're due based on on what is best, what we think is just. So it's interesting. I'm going to flip to, it's so lonely just being the only voice, and I can't see or hear you, but I'm so excited to y'all. If you have thought of death and dying, I'm sure a lot of you have come across Carnes and information. I have her reference on the slides. I really encourage you to look at her work. She talks very humanly about how people view death and dying. And she talks very clearly about things you already know. People are very comfortable with the premise of dying. We come face-to-face with people who think that the treatment is this therapeutic optimism. We have to treat based on any kind of out. One of the important things that states are doing, including Louisiana and a lot of your states, is much more productive end-of-life documents. Louisiana has La Poste. Many of you have documents that are reviewed on a regular basis. As you know, you have to review your advanced directives at admission if there's a change in condition. But I like the language that's used in terms of goals. CPR is a very crucial. Most older adults, if they have an advanced directive, it's the CPR or DNR. And we know that, but what's very important for us to remember is, if I ask you guys, and you could start typing if you want to, but what's the percentage of people who survive of all the population, if you were to stop breathing or your heart were to cease, and you were found without a pulse, in the general population, if you were resuscitated, what's your odds of survival? Does anybody know? Good. It's very, somebody's very smart. Tom knows. Cool. So about that, what is the light of survival? Most of you are schooled in this, but our residents and our families aren't necessarily. That's less than 8% in general, and there's some conflicting literature on that. Even the association says, if you were to stop breathing and you were outside of a hospital setting, the likelihood that you will be productively resuscitated is very low. Most people do suffer, at least if it's an immediate outcome. If you're done very, very quickly, most people will be resuscitated successfully. Among older people, older adults over 80, which is what we're dealing with, and the majority of our care, and Thomas could probably guess, it's less than 3%. So I'm here to say that we encourage residents to be DRs or nurses to do that. But I think we do need to tell people what logical reality is in terms of the band, in terms of survival. And people like Susan Nelson here, who authored La Post, well, people very bluntly, survival rate doesn't even mean that people will return to their optimal functioning. It doesn't mean people will return.
We have a concern that you're bringing up and turn the volume on your microphone or maybe speak into the phone. That's one thing. And then we did have one guest, 5%. So just to let you know that the sound quality is a little mix of people, and do what you can.
Oh, sorry. I was excited about my information about DNRs. Is this better?
Speak the receiver and not the speaker, or did we already try that?
Yeah, I'm trying to talk into the phone just normally now. Is this better?
Sounds better.
Okay, let's continue on then, and I'll zoom through my slides. We need to deal with and consider death and dying and interventions and advanced care planning, not just because it's part of the system of care, the requirements of MDS, but because we're dealing with people who are over the age of 65. 91% of our nursing home residents are age of 65. If you break it down, the age is growing. Yeah? I can still hear you, so you might want to mute if that was you. So you know that the percentage is about a quarter of our residents are between 75 and 84, and 13% are between 65 and 75. I don't have these stats, so I thought I would just cue this background. Non-maleficence, we have social workers, non-maleficence is to not inflict harm. It's a basic standard. We would not want to do this to our clients, to our colleagues, to ourselves. Beneficence is prevent harm, removing harm, and promoting good. As a nursing home social worker, there was a case where there was an older woman who was about to be discharged. And by the way, 30% of our residents do return home nationally. I had that we were in care and was in the midst of asphyxiation with a plastic bag around her head. It's one of those cases where my judgment overrode my teleological logical thinking. I wasn't even thinking about the adult. I was just thinking that when I knocked on the door, entered her room, there was a very eerie feeling, and she was in the process of active suicide. I went back from her head and then had to deal with the consequences and also my own reaction to her self-determination. So it's not one of our cases we're going to deliberate on, but I ask you, to think about that. What would you do? How would you write that up? How is that a potential problem? What did we miss? So it's important to think about people wishes. Maybe we didn't do a good enough job assessing her as a suicide risk in terms of her condition. So we also have, if you haven't seen this standards of care, people should look this up. I won't go through every standard of care, but this is also a resource that spells out our roles as social workers, as a team member, institute a complex assessment and intervention with the team. I put up a care plan example for you. I see it's approaching 3:30, so I'm going to move steadily through as to give my colleague Sherry ample time with her cases. But then another resource for people, Terry's social work care plans for the nursing home social worker. It's easy to access online, and she's very willing to send reprints, but you can post of examples to write care plans. So I know when I was practicing, I thought it was a useful thing to see different examples. So newest for hospice care, or say if a person's problem or need was that they were in the process of a decline, if they've been viewed as in the active process of dying. If you called in hospice or if hospice care involved, that could be part of your plan. Then goals or objectives, the comfort, sharing feelings regarding end of life, and issues if needed or able. So I encourage you to go through different approaches, care plan examples. We know ethics in the nursing home setting are becoming more and more important with advances in medical care and treatment, standards with MDS. It's just people wishing to go home or verbalizing their desire in terms of their conditions, what the logical nature is, and actually Sherry's case deals with that beautifully. We know that family needs and demands and preferences are probably one of our most challenging studies in our practice. Narcotic use, that's a high area within the nation that we're looking to reduce. Antipsychotic use, non-traditional. These are other areas that we always have to juggle concurrently with our practice. Thinking about consent, informed consent, autonomy of our residents. The ethic model, which is Elaine Congress's model out of Fordham, a lot of people who see ethics, as you know, have constructed a paradigm or a model you can use to really hang the dilemma on. So have a dilemma, an life decision, or today's condition, something occurring in your facility where your values as a social work professional are at odds with perhaps the agency settings, perception, or the family or the resident themselves. The wrong is to examine your own personal values, your perspective, maybe social context of what's going on, how your agency deals with an end-of-life decision making, client the professional values. You think about what ethical standard from the NHSW code applies. It's very helpful. Think about relevant laws and case decisions. Then to hypothesize about different courses of action. So any decision, you're going to think, what are potential outcomes for this consequence? We do that in practice. We do it in policy practice. What is if we do not identify the benefits and losses? Who will benefit? Who will be harmed in your our love commitment to the most vulnerable. And we always have to consult with supervisors and colleagues about ethical choices. We social workers, that autonomy is a crucial component of what we do. A lot of our residents have impaired decisional capacity, but we know that people can make autonomous choices. We autonomous actions are choosers who act intentionally with understanding and with controlling influences that determine the action. I don't mean to vilify families by any such, but the literature does state that really family conflicts are the ones that do become the most present, especially in end-of-life decision making. So particularly around nutrition, particularly around food. And if you've ever seen Barbara's work, she talks about how everything we do is really surrounded around food. And holidays, our lives, our celebrations, and it's been hard for people to imagine. But the majority, and I'm distilling this, and I hope with forgiveness you'll appreciate the spirit and get into this a little bit more. But she also talks about how when we die, the process of thinking is we reject food, we reject nourishment, and they're very, very clear processes in which are, if we die a gradual death, and she says, as many of you know, there's only two ways to die, right? We gradually, over time, or we die quickly. So I want you just to think about that in terms of your own experience. She and other people die as we live. If you live fast and furiously, sometimes you die fast and furiously. I think it's a rather interesting idea. And all of us in long-term care, if we're dealing with people who are there an average of 2.5 years, if not short-stay residents, gradual. Many of our residents die over a gradual period. So we have to think about revisiting their rights and their wishes. Risk management, we have to think about consultation, documentation, reasonable standard of care. I'm hoping that I'm not breaking up too much, but I'd like to, at this point, pass it over to share for the case examples and deliberate using the ethic model and using just some questions. Let me give it to Sherry. Thanks so much for my little piece here.
Hey everyone, I'm Sherry Saturno. I'm very delighted to be speaking with you today and to have the opportunity to work with Lilly, Bob, and Mercedes. I am going to be talking a little bit about two very different people, and I hope by hearing their stories it will help you in your roles. I'm going to answering any questions that you may have, and I'm going to start off with talking a little bit about Mary, who is an elderly woman with dementia. Here we go. So the first case study. So Mary was an 81-year-old widowed female who resided in a private home in suburban New York outside of New York City. She had no children, and she had no close family either. She didn't have any sisters or brothers. She was alone in her home since her husband had passed away, and her memory had progressively deteriorated as she had become older. A couple had befriended her. They would help her. They would run errands, buy groceries for her occasionally. And what actually happened is they gained her confidence, and they gradually moved into her home and did not pay rent, did not pay any bills at all, and really were financially exploiting her and taking advantage of her. Mary, who previously had this entire home to herself, ended up living in one room of her entire house, would become increasingly split as she was unable to care for it. And the young couple who moved in with her did not do any cleaning, did not do any maintenance on the home. Mary became dehydrated, malnourished, and she was found by medical responders lying in a bed with her own feces. Next was Mary was taken to a hospital, and she was subsequently discharged to a skilled nursing facility because the doctors thought she could benefit from some short-term rehab in terms of her own walking ability. While she was at the facility, she was determined to have dementia, and the staff there realized that she really needed a legal guardian. Guardianship proceedings were instituted by the nursing home. A couple who had been abusing her expressed interest in becoming her legal guardian. And what happened was, the nursing home had to really evaluate, was there anyone who could be a guardian for Mary? And unfortunately, after an extensive search through family, all of her family was gone. There had been no family in the first place. What ended up happening was that this abusive young couple was, at first claimed to be a family member, and that was disproved. They really want to become her legal guardian, but the reason why was because they wanted to inherit her home, and they wanted to inherit any money that she had. The social worker at the nursing home was subpoenaed to testify against this young couple. And what happened is an arrest warrant was issued for them after the judge heard all the facts from the situation, and they actually fled the area. A nonprofit agency called Family Services Society Westchester was appointed guardian. And the goal was really to get Mary home. That was all Mary talked about, how much home meant to her. Home was the only place that she felt safe. So at this point, Mary actually needed 24/7 care to be able to live independently. A mortgage was pursued to pay for the cost of care so that she could live her remaining days at home. Able to go home with a qualified professional and have a nurse's aide there with her. The goal was successful. It did take some time. It took about 8 months, but Mary did return to her home with a live-in professional caregiver. Very angry with the social work staff at the nursing home. And she was angry with them because she perceived them as preventing her from going home. Home was the only place that she ever felt safe, and the only thing that she had left after her husband had passed away. All of her belongings were there, all of her prized possessions. And she felt like the social work staff were preventing her. She almost felt as though the nursing home was a jail. While she did not like the couple who abused her, unfortunately they had become the only family that she had, and they represented a means of going home for her. So really, as social workers, what's interesting is you often understand that you are trying to do the right thing, but your clients may not always perceive it the same way. And the issues that we're dealing with in this situation are exploitation, financial abuse of elders, self-determination, and quality of life. So what I'm really interested in, I'm wondering if anyone might have any questions. I'd love to hear them. What are your thoughts on Mary's situation? Have you had any residents in your facilities where this same issue has come up? Troubling for me is when I think about how many elders are actually in that situation now that we don't know about. It doesn't have to be a young couple who befriends them and tries to take financial advantage of them. It can actually be these elders' own family members. So that's very concerning. So I'll give everyone a moment to think if they may have any questions that they'd like to submit that. And I'm going to move on to another very interesting story. This is actually a young man. We're going to call him Vincent. And he was only 25 years old at the time that this happened. He was a young, newly married man. He had been working as an electrician. What happened is he was electrocuted on the job, and unfortunately he had become profoundly disabled. At that age, at 25, he had never created any type of advanced directives, and he was now in a vegetative state. He was rendered incapable of making any decisions. He could not speak, and very unfortunately, he was unable to communicate in any way. He was admitted to a skilled nursing facility where he was put on a ventilator. And Matt had conflicting ideas about what was best for him. and it was extremely troubling for the staff and how young he was, only at the age of 25, and what really was ahead for him. Issues that came up in this situation are quality of life issues, self-determination, and the withdrawing of life-sustaining treatment. In this case, Vincent's wife agreed to have a physician issue a DNR for him. What was interesting also is that the staff of the skilled nursing facility were very suspicious of his young wife. They had learned that she had filed for divorce prior to his accident, and there was a lot of concern about who was really looking out for his best interests. Was this clearly protecting him? He could not really communicate and hadn't been able to make any advance directives at a young age. It probably had never even crossed his mind. The social work staff and the medical staff at this nursing home debated the quality of Vincent's life and taking into consideration how very young he was, and they were unable to reach any type of consensus. What happened is that Vincent remained on life-sustaining treatment indefinitely. So basically, my thoughts may be, in terms of that decision, that determination, I'm wondering if most people would agree with that determination, if you would perceive that as being the ethical decision given the circumstances, or if you have approached that situation differently. Okay, so I'm wondering if anyone might have any questions or any comments that they'd like to share on this. I think that as the workers, especially in settings such as nursing homes, it can be extremely fast-paced, it can be extremely a difficult situation, and you are really bombarded with residents, with family members, with nurses, with doctors. Everyone has their own idea of what is best for the resident. But what's unique about what we do is we have a different perspective, I think, than any other profession does. These situations with Vincent and Mary, they can really weigh heavily on the social worker's mind. What I start to think about, colleagues in the nursing homes and working with patients such as, for example, Mary, you are working to try to protect her and to make sure that you maintain her, her individuality, her integrity. You're trying to protect her from anyone taking advantage of her, from financially abusing her, physically abusing her, neglecting her. You also have to keep in mind, we have to try to figure out what would be the best use of our skills and our talents. I think in this situation with Mary, was actually able to go to court and explain all of the issues that were surrounding this case, explain what Mary's personal situation was. And I'm going to pause for a moment because I see that a question just came up. And the question is...
We have other questions in the chat box that I don't think you're able to see. But why don't you go ahead with the questions in the Q&A box, Sherry, and I'll read some of the questions in the chat box.
Okay, so the question I see is, I am joining you as a student. I would like to understand what is a DNR. That is actually a great question, and I will be happy to explain that. A DNR is a do not resuscitate order. A do not resuscitate would mean that if a resident is in a nursing home and their heart were to stop beating, it means that that person does not want to be resuscitated. They want to they want to be allowed to just pass away in that moment. You may see that someone signs a DNR when they discover they have a terminal illness. You may see that elders want to sign a DNR when they have reached a certain age and they feel as though this is the natural progression of their life. They do not want to extend their life past that. So basically, that's what it means. A doctor will sign that, make it official, and that means that that individual is not to be brought back if their heart is to stop beating. Okay, some more questions. Let's see.
Question that says, is a vegetative state, the physician recommend life-sustaining treatment?
That's an excellent question. What had happened is that after this accident, this young man was in this, unfortunately, in this, I'm going to describe it as an irreversible state. I believe that because there was the doctors right after this accident being feverishly to try to save him, he was put on life-sustaining equipment. I think prior to there having been any discussion about ethically what is right, what are his wishes, and then to search and find out as much information as possible. That's how it happened, that right after the accident, doctors attempted to maintain life, and he ended up on this equipment. Once he was on the equipment, it was quite an issue to try to take him off the equipment, and it did not end up actually happening.
Also, the issue in part is the adults have the right to decide whether or not to accept care, and he was not able to communicate if he would like care, and he hadn't made an advance directive. So there wasn't indication of what he would want. Depending on the state law, and it does vary from state to state, some states have an order of decides on behalf of an adult who has lost decisional capacity. And in states that do have an order, often it's the spouse is the first decision maker. So even if the woman had applied for divorce, she was still the spouse and probably could make a case for representing his wishes if that was what the state agreed. And, that's really the importance of the Supreme Court case about Nancy Cruzan, which decided in 1990. We're about 25 years into it now. And every time somebody enters the nursing home, the nursing home is responsible for letting them know that they have the right to an advance directive. They can't force them to have an advance directive, but everybody needs to know they have the right to an advance directive, and that directive needs to be part of the medical chart. In this situation, without an advance directive, it would depend on the state law in terms of who's going to speak for him. And if there isn't anybody who has come up to speak for him, then I think that it would not be uncommon for physicians to put him on life support because they're probably not feeling they're the person to make that call.
That's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I actually just wanted to answer. I just see another question that popped up, and it's really asking about Vincent. Do you have any family that could help him make make decisions, or any close friends? He did have close friends, but in terms of his family, he was raised by a single mother, and he did not know his father. His mother had actually passed away. I believe it happened right after he graduated high school. Unfortunately, he never knew his dad, so that person was not in the picture. There was no information on that individual. I can say that he did have friends, and his friends were torn about what would be best for him. It was very, very difficult to accept someone at such a young age being in such a state. People were hoping for miracles. People were hoping that something would happen. That I think they were hoping that one day he would just wake up and be himself again. So it was very difficult. I'm sure that some of you could imagine. Some of his friends thought that they should hold out hope and see if maybe his condition could somehow improve. I know that this probably doesn't sound realistic to all of you, but I think sometimes their emotion will just outweigh your logic and your reasoning. And then some of his other friends thought that it wasn't right and that, he should let go because, he wouldn't want to spend the remaining days that he had in that state.
This is Bob Conley, and I was an ICU worker before I went to CMS, and we would have many cases like Vincent, and it was very hard on the staff either way. If the decision was made for a young person, that was a real stress and then if people are left in a more vegetative state for a time, then the nurses actually called their ICU, nursing home care, nursing home, because the patient was on ventilator and needed full nursing care and yet had very limited potential. So, very difficult situation and a good case. The one question I had for Lilly was, in her case, where she discovered a woman with a plastic bag on her face, and what did you see as the ethical dilemma there? I think she acted appropriately, and having been in situations, how hard was that for her personally to deal with seeing such an event and being involved in it? I think your phone's on mute, Lilly, if you want to answer that. Well, mute your phone. You just go by the red X and hit right-click, and I think you can unmute it.
I am. Yeah, I think it's an informative case for me because if we say that you always uphold a person's self-determination, in that case, there was no way to think about this woman's right. In a philosophical way, we all have the right to determine our own, ending, if you will. And how it's a dramatic case about we do have to interfere or intervene as social workers. Times like that time, we have to act in a paternalistic manner. So it's the ethical dilemma is her wishes in conflict with my professional responsibility, right? So I really think it's a pure ethical issue because I was faced with her desire at that point, and we know that suicide is very immediate, and sometimes it's just the moments that precede it. So that's a very clear case where there was an intervention, and I overrode her self-determination and her autonomy. So it was hard for me in as much as there were a few things I did that we know as practitioners. You knock on a door, you wait for someone to answer. You respect the person's privacy and integrity and all of that. So it's a good case for people to think about what would you do and how does it represent these competing issues if there are any. Because we do have to defer to standards of care. If a person is at to harm themselves or others, do we get involved? I hope that kind of answers. But I felt guilty. She was angry. So she went on to go to a lower level of care. I visited her, and she was okay, but she had a long-standing depression prior to the event. I don't want to take too much time on that, but I appreciate you even indulging me with the patient. So you all, every single one of you, 75 and so, or so of you, deal with people deciding not to eat any longer. But Vince's case, does anybody else think about the social or the family? Wait a minute. Yeah, the family, the wife or potential soon-to-be ex-wife. What do you think about the staff and their suspicion? Like in our role, how do we separate our opinions about families if we think that they may be exploitive, act in an improper way? Like, I throw it out kind of Socratically. What do you think about being suspicious of her as they learn that she filed for divorce? Is it relevant? Is it not relevant? What do you think?
I think a really excellent point. I said, relevant, is it not relevant? I think it's human nature, really, that they, once they found out that his wife had filed for divorce, before this happened, they started to become very suspicious. Is it relevant? I don't know. If it is, I think that's subject to debate. I think that they just started to be concerned and wonder if she really had his best interest at heart. but should that have even been a consideration? That's an excellent point. I think that's really worth thinking about and recognizing, the judgments that we make about people, every day. Once that was learned, it completely cast his wife in a different light.
I just think so much of this is around human nature. We do judge. We do have to think about our own values and how do they, interfere or enhance our decisions. It's a tricky one. I think Bob brought up an excellent point about kind of distributive justice and cost and, do more protective in our engines. Any other thoughts from Merce? Are there more questions about that one?
We've got more questions, but I would like to just interject and say that's why it's so important for nursing home social workers and nursing homes in general to have access to an ethics committee. And even if you don't have an in-house ethics committee, if there is something in your community of people who'd be willing to take on some ethical issues and as a group discuss them and make sense of them so that people can build their ethical intelligence in being able to handle the situation. Regarding the wife who had filed for divorce, boy, that'd be a rumor, to be so careful about how we act on information that we get in roundabout ways. And second of all, whether or not that's our call, right? So if we are suspicious of something, then we need to be talking with our supervisor. We need to be calling the ombudsman. We need to have dialogue. So the social worker doesn't have to carry this all herself or himself. We should have our antennas up, but then should also be looking to some fact finding. There is a question here that says, the area of DNR, along with other legal medical documents, and the decisions, the increase in the LGBTQ population. So how is the increase of the LGBTQ population affecting medical and legal documents of nursing home residents?
You want to handle that one?
So I can speak of my state of New York. Marriages, gay marriage is legal in New York, of course. And thinking about, that's such a great question. What has it had upon nursing homes? Usually each individual nursing home in New York has its own standard set of advanced directives. They would have a do not resuscitate order for have capacity, residents who do not have capacity by proxy. Residents, of course, can make their own health care proxy. To best answer that, for example, if a same-sex couple decides that, let's just say both of them are going to be admitted for residence into a long-term care facility. When they create a health care proxy, they would nominate, they can nominate whomever they wanted to, but they can nominate each other to act as their primary agent, and then nominate someone to be a secondary agent in case something happened to either one of them. The way the form is set up really in New York is that you basically nominate whomever you would like to. You could nominate, it doesn't have to be, it really doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be your legal partner. In terms of a DNR, that is something that when it has capacity, they would sign for themselves. They would say that I do not wish to be resuscitated. In those cases where a resident lacks capacity, generally it would be the legal partner of that person to sign a document. Because, New York is legal, of course, the person's husband or wife could sign that form. There's no issue. I answered that question. Could I clarify that question? Is there anything that I could do to explain that a little bit better?
I think you did fine.
Okay.
But we're in a situation where same-sex marriage is not legal in every state. And so, again, that's where the social worker needs to understand what the situation is in that state, and especially then for gay couples, if their state doesn't recognize the marriage, then they want to be doing an advance directive that would appoint their spouse as the surrogate decision maker if that's what they want.
That's exactly right, yes.
Going back to Vincent's situation with his wife, we had one of our attendees write this. She said, I believe it's not relevant that the wife might have filed for divorce. How would she benefit from an accident? With huge insurance policy or not? The only thing she would have is bills if there were no insurance policy, and being young, she most likely didn't know what to do either. And so, that's a good point, too, that even if she had filed for divorce, even if that were true, this was her husband, and she's probably very upset by the whole situation, the shock of it, too. And we don't understand the circumstances under which she did file for divorce. That doesn't mean she still doesn't have strong feelings for him or still wouldn't represent his best interest. So a lot of investigating to do by somebody else. And another writer wrote in, if you think there's something funny going on, report it to DHS.
Yes. In New York, everything is probably called something else. Department of Health. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are all valid points, and that's why it's so important, as social workers, to be impartial, non-judgmental. And really, just to backtrack for a second, no, there wasn't. There absolutely was not a large insurance policy, and the wife did not benefit from this unfortunate accident that happened to her husband. Really, what happens in cases like that is generally there has to be a Medicaid application done, and no one can really afford to pay for that type of treatment. And they do apply for some type of help, which is usually a form of Medicaid for that type of long-term care treatment. So, yeah, that questioner is absolutely right.
There was another question that came in regarding Mary, and the question is that this person has patients coming in for short-term rehab. So they may identify issues at home. We would like to get more involved, like Mary. However, it seems time and finances may drive many decisions, such as Medicare coverage. And I guess of working in hospitals, that when you have to get a patient discharged or out of a SNF bed, there's a time limit. And was a factor in this case that you have as much time with me, and or that her finances determined this?
In this situation, no. Actually, this was a little bit unusual because the administrator and executive director of this nursing home took a personal interest in Mary's situation and was actually very concerned about her. In most cases, absolutely, that would be a major problem because once she has used up her Medicare days, generally we're either looking at someone doing a Medicaid application or private pay, or do our assets to see what could be used to pay for her care and treatment at the nursing home. But I could tell you in this situation it was very unusual because this issue didn't really apply. The administrator of this facility said no matter what, that they would make sure that Mary had a safe place until she could go home safely with this 24/7 care. So, and of course, this happened to be, religiously affiliated nonprofit facility. I don't know if that helps, frame where the administrator's thoughts were coming from, but in cases it would be a major problem. But in this situation, no.
Questions or comments if anybody would like to. And there was a question from one of our attendees wondering how many people use Pulse in their nursing homes. So if you use Pulse in your nursing home, will you use your electronic hand? do that by, on the right side of your screen, there's a way for you to raise your hand. And get a sense, 10 people have already raised their hand saying that they use Pulse. And so now 12, 30. If you use Pulse in your nursing home, would you please put your hand up electronically? So now we have about 50, the number going up, so I'm just going to let people wait for a while. But right now, it's like 16 out of 68 people, about a third, are using Pulse in their facility. And so our last webinar about end-of-life issues earlier this month with Jean Munn and Janine Wilson talked a little bit about Pulse. So if you don't know how we're using that term, the physician's order for life-sustaining treatment, check out the recording of a couple weeks ago where they go into much more detail about the Pulse form. Right?
Questions? This is Bob again. This Lily's case and a little of the other cases really remind me of the days of being on the front line with these decisions ethically. And I had a personal situation of where I worked with a drug-addicted mother who had a premature baby, and I was the ICU social worker, and I worked with her, and the baby died in the hospital, and then I tried to maintain contact with her over time, and then ultimately it was reported that she committed suicide. And I had tremendous angst of could I have done more, what were things I could have learned, how could I have helped, and I think in the case that Lilly described, the woman who was attempting suicide had a history of depression, and afterwards was angry. And I think that the price of dealing with these very complicated, very tense, as Lily's theory tells you, there's no yeses or nos. It's just grace and judgment and making the best decision. And yet often the social worker is who everybody comes to of why did that happen or what could we do. So just to know that personally, I think we're on the line in these situations, and there's a cost, and yet I think we need to support each other and realize that death makes everything more emphasized, and in a sense that we only can do what the best we can do within the family and the ethical issues and the team we're working with and the flawed care system we're dealing with and the complexity that's beyond a lot of easy decisions in short-term windows. So I just reminds me that the personal role of the social worker in these situations is pretty high, and there really need to be acknowledged that it's difficult and we can only do the best we can do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lily or Sherry, if there are any last comments you would like to make. I don't see I do see a question that we skipped over. We have a comment. This is back to Vincent. What kind of quality of life could he have if he's in a vegetative state? That's the question. What kind of quality of life could he have?
Really, in terms of that question, that's what everyone was really struggling with. I think they were torn between him so young and knowing what type of future he had, and also throwing in that some people were holding out hope that something would change, no matter how unrealistic that was, due to emotion and to remembering the vital and vibrant person that he used to be, and now seeing what happened to him. It was very difficult for them to reconcile who was with who he had become after this accident. So that's an excellent statement.
And the other side of the coin is, even if we don't think somebody has a high quality of life, for some people, be a live nurse. And even if we don't agree with that, we need to recognize that people have very different feelings. They're across the continuum about whether or not they would like to be kept alive under these circumstances. That's why we have the advance directives, so that we can try to honor what that person would want. And although it may be difficult for some people to imagine that he wouldn't want to continue, we see it in the court still with Sherry Shivo, what her parents thought versus her husband. And other people are carrying very different understandings about the meaning of life and also the meaning of feeding tubes and ventilators and things like that. So whether or not it's considered a high quality of life, it's up to the person, and then whether or not quality of life even matters. For some people, they want to be alive no matter what. And so we have to be open to hearing where people are coming from, because we will hear a lot of different perspectives. You, too, do yourself a favor and fill out your own advance directive. So we know, or your loved ones know, how you feel about some of these issues. Comments, Sherry or Lily, would you like to say anything else?
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for listening to us.
And thank you, everyone, because I just want to say a quick thing that what Mark is bringing up, and Sherry and Bob, if the majority of people are dying in institutions, hospitals, long-term care facilities versus home, think about how many of us as social workers are required to handle these really complicated realities that people are reluctant with death as a general rule, and we're kind of charged to untangle these very complex cases. So use them all. Think about like our own personal stuff, what might happen, identify, like Mer said, use ethics committees, but we need to be more connected, and I appreciate you listening today. It was great, a great honor. Thank you.
We're recording posted tomorrow, and so if you know anybody else who might want to hear today's conversation and presentation, please send them on the way to the recording. Thank you, everybody, for your time and your attention. Any further questions you can put on your evaluation form. Those of you who were present today during this live webinar will be emailed a certificate of attendance that indicates how many minutes you were logged on today's session. So that, I'd like to thank Bob for holding down the fort, getting us started, and Sherry and Lily for a fabulous presentation. And I want to also thank the people who sent their questions and comments to the chat box. That really contributed to today's presentation. So over and out, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.